Suppose we are live. Good. Perfect. Perfect. Right and good. Hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for this little onboarding session on the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. For today, we'll just have an overview of the product. We will see exactly what's going on behind the scene, how the components are looking. We will also give some small examples of deployments. We'll also have a demo with my dear colleague here, Diana, which is a system engineer here with Veeam. And towards the end of the session, I will just steal the mic one more time, and we will have a look over the VDCM 365, just another solution that we can provide to our customers. The main focus for today is only the Microsoft 365 data, so the big four will be taken care of. That means the Outlook, the SharePoint, the OneDrive, and the Teams. My name is Gabriel. I'm a senior system engineer here with Veeam, and me and Diana will make sure to deliver all the information for today. Without further ado, we will just close the cameras so our beautiful smiles do not really steal the show, let's say that, and we can focus on the presentation. All right, then, good. So, for today, as I mentioned, Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 will be our main topic. And we will start with the components. Now, on the left side, we will simply have the data source. As mentioned, Microsoft 365 is the focus. So, of course, we will treat this data with respect and we will start performing the backups for later on to be used onto restoration. Now, the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 will act as a normal piece of software, meaning it needs to be deployed on top of a Windows machine. That machine can be in the cloud, or it can be a virtual machine sitting on VMware or Hyper-V or the hypervisor of your choice, or it can even be placed on top of a physical server. As long as it's a Windows, we don't have an issue with that. As for the data source, as I mentioned, Microsoft 365 Suite, this includes the Microsoft 365 services that are already present in the cloud, such as Exchange Online or the SharePoint Online, but we can also touch on data that sits on premises, like an Exchange or a SharePoint server that we still keep close to our on-site infrastructure as a server. Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 as a whole infrastructure, in order to work, will also have specific components that we will need. So to begin with, we will have the proxy server, which is in use for data transfer and encryption. Without these compute resources, there's not much that we can do on top of the backup infrastructure for the Microsoft 365. Next, we will have the main quote-unquote brain of the operation, the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 server. This one will be responsible for keeping the product up and running at all time. It will have the console initially installed on top of it so we can communicate and leverage the solution. And exactly as we are doing with other Veeam products as well, we'll keep the database itself. It will be a PostgreSQL deployment that will be used in order to keep the configuration database, the cache database as well, and later on, as we will see, the NATs. Next, we will have the backup storage, which can be either local or object storage. Now, for the local, we don't really have that many options. The data simply sits on premises in a designated backup repository that the user will choose to use. For the object storage, we can also leverage backup copies, and we will need those object storages because otherwise backup copies cannot really work. We can only define object storages as sourced for those types of jobs. And in the end, the self-service restore portal. This comes as a little helping hands for the administrators out there. Initially, the idea was you'll have an administrator that takes care of the whole Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 infrastructure, meaning the components and how everything is being set up and the daily operation. Now, given how fast the Microsoft 365 data changes pretty much all the time, we will of course get into a situation where we will need to perform restoration. Maybe an email needs to be restored, or I cannot really find a file from the SharePoint side of things. In that scenario, the administrator will be the one that would need to browse those specific backups and later on perform the restoration. Now, of course, as organization grows, they will automatically face an issue with the number of requests that will be raised towards the administrator for restoration. For that simple reason, we created a model in which the administrator can designate specific people inside the organization as restore operator. And later on, they can engage with the self-service restore portal in order to perform restorations for multiple people. Maybe I have a full team of IT admins, and all of them, they will be able to perform restorations in the future, just to make sure that multiple people can manage the same data. So not only one guy is responsible for everything. Now, in a nutshell, that's pretty much how every deployment of Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 looks like. And all of those components, they are crucial in their own way. Of course, in the beginning, we will start with just a normal VBM server that will act as both a proxy and a backup repository. In most cases, this is enough for smaller deployments, somewhere around, let's say, 50 users. But as time goes by, we should prioritize, for instance, security, which cannot really be ensured that easily when we are discussing about local storages, or performance, which one singular proxy, it's simply not enough anymore. But we will discuss about some models of deployments in the future. Now, moving on, we will discuss about the product architecture and we will focus on the PostgreSQL database. Now, the PostgreSQL database will contain the configuration database, the most important. This is the one that keeps all the history, all the changes, everything that's happening. It will also have access to the cache database, basically the metadata, quite useful because without it, we don't really know where the pointers are going. So we need to have it all the time, and usually they just stick together. They can either be on the same server as the VBM, or if we'd like, we can also place it remote. It's highly dependent on us. Now, as time goes by, more and more objects will be, let's say, overseen by the VBM 365 server. In that scenario, automatically the size of the database will grow. So we also will include in this session the means to perform a sizing calculation in order to estimate how big it is in the end. Moving on, the access control part of things. So this is supported for both users and groups, and we don't really need local system administrators in order to operate. Now, we will need, of course, the Veeam Backup Administrator role, which can be given to multiple users inside your infrastructure without any kind of issues. And of course, we do support MFA logon nowadays. It works both for the VB365 console and the Veeam Explorers, which are the main way for performing restorations. Immutable backups is something quite important. First and foremost, they will be used only when we are discussing about object storages. So that's their main capability, let's say, for the immutability to be present inside my backup infrastructure. In most cases, customers are just fine with keeping the data locally without any kind of immutability. Of course, our classic recommendation is whenever we can go for immutability, we should definitely do that. For the immutability types, we have two of them, compliance mode and governance mode. And of course, the retention period can be increased on an immutable repository after the initial configuration. Moving on, we will discuss about the immutability options and we will compare them depending on the job type. Now we have a little table over here where we will be focusing around the primary backup and the backup copy. If we remember from the beginning, only when we are discussing about object storages, the backup copy becomes a possibility. So automatically everything over here will be solely centered around the object storage used inside your Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 infrastructure. When we're discussing about the governance mode, which is optional, both of them will support that. For the retention period, of course, will be set on top of the repository itself, so both of them can do that. But when we are discussing about extending the retention period or extending the immutability period, only the primary backup will be able to do that. When we're discussing about backup copies, that option is not there anymore. Right now, we will have a small example of a small deployment somewhere around 100 users. Now, on the left side, we'll have the data source, everything that is coming from the Microsoft 365 services, the Exchange, the SharePoint, the OneDrive, and the Microsoft Teams. Given the fact that we are quite a small company, let's say in this example, the backup server and the proxy will be deployed on top of the very same machine. And so will happen with the PostgreSQL database, which will keep both the cache and the configuration DB. Now, in this scenario, one singular on-premise machine, for instance, it's more than enough. The only thing that we are using from the outside will be the object storage, an S3 that is capable to have immutability on top of it. So for a small deployment, this should be more than enough. It pretty much takes at the level of performance, one proxy it's enough. It will also take at the level of complexity, in my case, one machine taking care of everything. With low complexity also comes low management. In the end, I only have the backup server on one machine, and that's the only one that I should take care of. And security, coming from that immutability with an S3 object storage in use for keeping my backups. In this scenario, the proxy will be the one to process everything from backup to restore without any kind of issues. And unless I'm upgrading a little my organization and I'm hiring some more people, or simply the number of users will grow in the future, all I will need is just an extra proxy. That will be it from this side of things. So whenever we start, we should start with small deployments in mind. As later on, time goes on, automatically extra components might be required. Now, we will also have a small model of job design. At Veeam, we like the idea of making sure that we structure the jobs inside the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 solution according to the services that they are aimed at protecting. For instance, we will have one singular job that will take care of everything that comes from the Outlook. So that will be both the mail and the archive mailboxes, one job for OneDrive only, one job for SharePoint, and one job for Teams. This will allow me to see everything that is going on from the service perspective. At the same time, if one of the job, let's say, has some issues, I can simply work on it while the others are simply moving forward without any kind of troubles. If I will need in the future, for instance, to, let's say, engage in different backup repos, if I have those multiple jobs, I will simply just relocate them to a different repository. So automatically, even though from the management perspective, it's a little bit harder to manage four jobs instead of one singular for the whole organization, this type of approach will bring more advantages. Now, if we are discussing about multiple repositories as we did before, a proxy pool can be used. We will discuss about that in a second. And a classic recommendation from our side is to make sure to point the SharePoint and the Teams backup jobs to the same repository for cases where I will have, let's say, duplicated data. Now, for the environment sizing, as promised before, this is the classic calculator. We also left the link at the bottom of this slide. You will also receive the documentation, so the slides themselves after the session ends, and you'll also receive the recording because everything that we are speaking today is a live recording in the end. So what we usually recommend, whenever we are changing something in the environment, it doesn't have to be about Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. VBR will go with the same logic. It's a good idea to use those calculators in order to estimate exactly what we might need. And for the product architecture, we will discuss over here about the nets. Now, the net server, they will utilize the Jetstream technologies. Those will be used whenever a proxy pool gets created. And it makes sure that we have a specific logic when we are operating with multiple streams at the same time, such as making sure we have control over the job queue, or if there are any kind of changes, the nets will automatically be able to see that. We will also gain control over the streams themselves, such as the session event stream, or the processing stream, or the orchestration stream. Generally speaking, whenever proxy pools are involved, first and foremost, the NAT server must be taken care of. During the initial installation of the product of the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365, we do have the option to either set a NAT server or we can use an instance that already exists inside my environment. And moving on, the backup proxy pools. Those are in use whenever we're discussing about larger environments, because it comes to a point where one singular proxy will not cut it anymore. And to have dedicated proxy for the jobs, it might make the management a little bit harder. In that scenario, we can create a backup proxy pool that can manage multiple repositories without any kind of issues. Now, when the jobs start, basically, the Veeam will have a look at my backup proxy pool and will see exactly, hey, who is free for me to assist in this type of operation. And automatically, in the background, we will start with an algorithm in order to perform load balancing as well, just to allocate those actions, those jobs to different backup proxies from the pool, depending on how used they are at that specific moment. Now, the backup proxy pool, they can process both backups and restores as well. So if I'm running multiple restores in parallel, the backup proxy pools can help me with that. They are designated to work with object storages. And if we are discussing about proxy on Linux, only proxy on Linux can be used for object storage only. So no local anymore. Now, as we mentioned before, it provides automated load balancing and throttle-based balancing as well. So it can control the number of objects issued for processing. It can check the throttle at specific amounts of time and, if needed, increase the number of processed objects if we don't need any, if we don't notice any kind of throttle. By default, the limit is of 64 objects per proxy processor. Of course, those numbers can be adjusted according to the resources that I have left out for the proxies and the load at that specific time. But once again, everything happens in the background by the Veeam's logic itself, so there is no need to think too much about it. We just need to have in mind that whenever we are discussing about a bigger deployment with multiple users, maybe multiple backup repos, I will automatically get into a situation where the backup proxy pools would be preferred. Now, how it works exactly? Well, for the processing part, the objects are distributed between multiple proxies, and of course, we will have priorities depending on the actions that are performed. Exactly as we are doing with the VBR, anything that counts as a restoration is top priority for us. Next, we will have incremental backups. Those will be prioritized against the full backup because they will take less time to finalize. And in the end, we will have the full backup. So if I have all three of them at the same time, priority goes from restore, incrementals, and full. Also, the proxy pools will perform rebalancing. Now, they will be periodically redistributed, those jobs that are happening on top of the proxy pool, between proxies for better performances. We will have a look at proxy availability. We will have a look at timers to see exactly when something has started or when it might be ending. After the restart of the controller itself, we will also re-see everything that is happening from the perspective of the resources that the proxy pools have available to them. And if a new job is added, in that scenario, the least loaded proxy is automatically assigned. So as I mentioned, everything happens by logic in the background. It's not much of a user input needed. Next, the custom service account for proxies. Now, proxies can run under custom service account. There is no need for a local system on a Windows, for instance. Those are supported for both Windows and Linux proxies, and we can either use an existing account or create a fresh one only for this purpose. Now, we will have a look at a mid-sized deployment or a distributed deployment, as we may call it. We call it distributed in this scenario because, as you can see, the backup server, it's all the way down quite alone. It's no longer a proxy since I'm discussing about a proxy pool. And for the repositories, everything happens in the cloud. I have both a primary and a secondary location for my backups. Now, the question is what happens with the database? And the short answer is nothing. It's just somewhere else. So in situation where the deployment goes really, really big, but the resources that I can allocate to the backup server are not really that many, in that scenario, I will simply just take the database and place it somewhere else. That is an option that many customers are doing nowadays. So in this scenario, the data will be processed by the proxy pool, the data that comes from the Microsoft 365 side of things. The backup server at all time will see exactly what's going on, and it will communicate with the PostgreSQL database. The proxies will pretty much do the same when we are discussing about communicating with the cache. Keep in mind, the cache is the one that sees the metadata, the pointers, if you like. And in the end, the proxy pools will be responsible for sending the data to my backup repo. So a mid-sized deployment might look something like this. Many customers are going for this approach, especially when we are discussing about sending the data to an S3 object storage. And let's finalize with a large scale deployment. As you can see, quite a lot of components happening over here. In this scenario, the Microsoft 365 services are located both in the cloud and on premises. Now, I do have my proxy pool, but all of a sudden I have a NATS pool as well with multiple nodes. In that scenario, if we are discussing about thousands and thousands and thousands of users inside my organization, just a normal proxy pool with one singular NAT server is simply not enough, so I will need automatically to scale out. In this scenario, I also have the ability to work with a single proxy if I would like to do so. The Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 server will be the one responsible for overseeing everything. And of course, the database will be a different machine. Now, for the storage itself, as we can see over here, we are discussing about on-prem storage or object storage as well. As you might notice, the proxy pool, they will only go for the object storage. If I want that on-prem, a singular proxy must be used. We don't see this one every day. Let's say me and Diana over here. Large scale deployments, once again, those are usually in use for pretty big customers. And even in those scenarios, they are very, very, let's say, resource intensive in order to ensure I have a good backup window. Usually in the market, we go for about an average of 8 hours. But as new people, they will get, let's say, onboarded in the product itself, and we will have to back up their own data. Automatically, the first iteration of the job being a full, it will take the longest. So the more resources I can designate to my VBM solution, to my VBM architecture, basically, the better I will go in terms of both the backup window and the restore time. All right, then, good. I think it's time for Diana to show you a quick demo on how the VBM 365 looks like. So, Diana, I think you can pick it up from here. I will just let you share over.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gabi. Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Boro, as mentioned, and I'm a systems engineer here at Veeam Software. And yeah, I'm really happy to spend the next couple of minutes walking you through Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 in the live product. So after seeing how everything looks on the slides, I'd now like to switch over to our demo lab so you can see how this actually looks and behaves in the graphical user interface. So I'm going to switch to the demo environment right now. And hopefully you can all see my screen. So welcome to the lab. What you see here is actually the graphical user interface of Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. For those of you who are familiar with Veeam Backup on application, you'll notice that the, let's say, look and feel is very similar and the workflows are largely the same. So starting with version 8 of the product, we support, by the way, the multi-factor authentication for the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 console itself. This is a classic OTP-based multi-factor authentication. So when you enable it, you scan a QR code with your Authenticator app, and every time someone signs in, they have to provide the one-time code from the app in addition to their password. So in this demo lab, the multi-factor authentication isn't enabled live. So the idea is simple. I go to the Manage Users and Roles in the Home tab, and I can enable it from here. And basically, you need to keep your Authenticator app handy, type in the OTP, and you're in. So once again, I just need to go to the hamburger menu in the top left, go to Users and Roles, and here we have the option to enable the multi-factor authentication for the console users. So something else that is quite important here to mention is the fact that the multi-factor authentication is available for user accounts. So user groups are actually not supported here. Okay, let's move on to the infrastructure. So the backup infrastructure of our product. So if you remember the architecture slide that Gabi so nicely presented, Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365, just like Veeam Backup for application, is built around three main components. So we have the management server, the proxies, and the repositories. When you place these components, where you place these components actually has a big impact on overall performance. And the console that we're looking at can be, of course, installed on the backup server itself, like we most probably did in this lab, or on an admin workstation for remote management. Now, the backup management server itself is a physical or virtual Microsoft Windows server, and it acts as the control panel for everything connected to this backup solution. So you can deploy it on premises, in Azure, or on an EC2 instance if you want. There are also pre-configured marketplace images for Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 in both Azure and AWS if you want a quick start. And just to give you a concrete sizing example, perhaps, so if we imagine, let's say, a tenant with roughly 2,000 users, moderate activity, perhaps hourly backups for Exchange, OneDrive, and SharePoint, and let's say daily team backups, a practical starting point for the backup server in this scenario would be around 8 vCPUs, 32 GB RAM, and perhaps, I don't know, let's say Windows Server 2022. So other than that, obviously a fast local disk and maybe PostgreSQL data. But as Gabi also mentioned, in the ending of the slides, you will have links to useful resources, including our Veeam sizing calculators, which we recommend you to use in order to project and be able to predict the ideal sizing for your situations. So obviously, we also need to take a look at protected object counts, number of repositories, and of course the retention in this Veeam sizing calculator, and adjust it up if any job concurrency justifies it, let's say. So that's usually enough to give us a feeling for what the resources for our components need to be. All right, let's move on now to the proxies, because that's where a lot of the so-called magic happens. So proxies are, as mentioned, responsible for moving data. So they pull the data out of Microsoft 365 and compress it and send it into the backup repository. And they do the reverse path for restores. So when you install Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 for the first time, you get what is called an all-in-one deployment. So a default proxy, which we can also see here, which is automatically created and registered. So this is our default Windows proxy. We have some information about it here, the status, the port, the operating system, and the utilized CPU and memory at the moment. So as mentioned, this runs on the exact same Windows server in our situation where the application itself is installed, the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 application, and it is part of this out-of-the-box all-in-one setup. So as soon as you install Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 and add your organization, you can theoretically start creating backup jobs right away without adding any additional components, because a default backup repository is also added. So what is important to mention here is that the role of this default proxy cannot be changed or removed. So this Windows default proxy is always here. And something else worth mentioning, which we will further see, this default proxy cannot be added to a proxy pool. So proxy pools are built from separate dedicated proxies, not from the embedded default one. So if I just click on Add Proxy here in the upper left corner, I can add an additional standalone proxy, of course, as many as I want, so Windows or Linux, or obviously I can go even one step further and configure the proxy pools. For a standalone proxy, we generally recommend a size of around 8 cores and 32 GB RAM. And as a rule of thumb, it's usually better to add more proxies of that size than to build one overly huge proxy. So that's where horizontal scalability gives you more flexibility and simpler troubleshooting, I'd say. Just another mention here. So as mentioned, for each proxy, we will be able to see the resource usage. So again, the status, the operating system, the CPU, and the memory consumption. So right now, the usage is perhaps not that high for the CPU, but quite high for the memory. And during long-running jobs, for example, these details help us identify spikes or perhaps a sustained high load and decide whether we should add more proxies or perhaps adjust the job design. So coming back to the proxy pools, an alternative to using only standalone proxies is the proxy pooling feature introduced in version 8. Now, just to show you here, a backup proxy pool, as was previously mentioned, is a logical entity that groups several backup proxy servers together. And as a single unit, these proxies in the pool can process data in parallel during backup copies, and of course, restore operations, which improves, of course, scalability and most importantly, load distribution. So in our current lab, I only have the default proxy right now, but, and this is why I cannot add it here. Usually this is where we can simply add the existing proxies to our pool, and basically that's about it. But what I would want to mention is that the nice thing that we eventually get to once we've added our proxy pool is a set of management options we get. That we can do per proxy inside the pool. So we can place a proxy into what is called the maintenance mode if it's not reachable, or if you are perhaps performing an upgrade on it. So that means that you can have, say, 2 proxies fully operational and 1 proxy in maintenance, let's say. And the backup job that's configured to use this pool will just distribute load across the 2 available proxies. So the job itself will continue without interruption. So the rule here is, as long as at least 1 proxy in the pool is available, the job continues processing data. And if you exit this maintenance mode while jobs are running, the proxy automatically rejoins the pool, in-flight data is synchronized again, and future load is balanced across all available proxies. So again, coming back to the how to add a new proxy in the wizard here, we of course need to first select the operating system, then specify the DNS name or the IP address, provide connection details, and choose which account runs the proxy service. So this is, by the way, where we can use the custom service account we talked about on the slides instead of local system, or why not even create a new account specifically for this service. All right, moving on to backup repositories, where the protected data actually lives, we have a management server, we have proxies to move and process data, and now we need a target where the backups will be stored. So in the lab, we have both local disk repositories and object storage repositories. So remember the rule, proxy pools can only be used if the backup job writes to an object storage repositories. For local repositories, we can only use individual standalone proxies. Let's edit the object storage repository so we can see the configuration together. So obviously first we need start with the classical name and description, then we choose the type and credentials. We can also see the connection to the storage account. If we go one step further here, so we have the account credentials and we have the bucket, let's say the bucket name, the folder within the bucket, and we can define limits for data usage. That's especially useful if the object storage is prepaid, let's say, subject to chargeback maybe, or if we simply want to avoid unpleasant surprises in monthly bills, we can set a soft limit to protect ourselves. On the next step, which is read-only here, because this repository already exists, we would, during initial creation, choose whether to bind this repository to a single proxy or to a proxy pool, let's say. So in this lab, the repository is still bound to the default standalone proxy. What is worth mentioning here, in earlier versions of the products, there was always a, let's say, direct exclusive link between a proxy and an object repository, because cache data lived on the proxy itself. So with proxy pooling and the move to centralized metadata, that strict one-to-one coupling is no longer required for object storage repositories. If we're talking about local disk repositories, however, the behavior still applies. So a single proxy server can host multiple repositories, but each local repository is uniquely bound to one proxy. And at the end of the repository wizard, we configure the retention mode, so the retention policy settings. There are two modes, and it's important to explain the difference between them clearly right off the bat. So we have a snapshot-based retention and an item level or object level retention. The snapshot-based retention is the recommended mode. It works like traditional backup retention. So we keep restore points for a defined number of days. If we configure 30 days, a backup taken today will be kept for 30 days from the backup time, from the time of the backup. The item level retention is the second option that we see here. Here, the creation or modification date of the item is actually what matters. So if a new email arrives today and we back it up and the retention is 30 days, that email is kept 30 days from its object creation date, not from the backup date. So in this case, retention is tied directly to the life of the object and not the backup point. And if we check under advanced, we can of course also define how often the retention policy is applied. So maybe daily, or if we want monthly at a specific time. So of course, Veeam scans for objects whose retention window has expired and safely removes them from the backup set if need be. And now moving on, a quick word on immutability on object storage repositories. So repositories with immutability enabled can be used for both backups and backup copies. Once data lands on such a repository, it cannot be modified or deleted for the duration of the configured immutability period. And this is again only available for object storage repositories. We can lock the data either for a fixed number of days or for the same time period as the repository's own retention setting, like in our situation. And there are two so-called immutability modes. So the default, the standard compliance mode, where locks cannot simply be removed, even not by administrators, and the governance mode. This can be enabled when creating a new object storage repository, because now it's again read-only. And in this mode, a storage administrator with special permissions is allowed to adjust locking and even delete protected backups if necessary. And once immutability is enabled for a repository, it cannot be turned off later, but we can change the length of the immutability period. The important caveat here, you cannot activate immutability on an object storage repository after it has already been created. So that decision must be made during initial setup. Now, if we just take a look at the local repositories, so we can, of course, store the data in a local disk repository as well. There is, as mentioned, a default repository as part of the all-in-one deployment that we've talked about. And we could simply use this local repository as a local disk storage on the backup server itself. So this is how we build our backup infrastructure. We either rely on the all-in-one components, so the default proxy and the default local repository, or we add standalone proxies, proxy pools, and if we want, object storage repositories for more scalable design. And one last remark on the architecture, even if all of this sounds perhaps too complex, don't forget that Veeam system engineers are exactly here for that. We are always happy to help with sizing, do the calculations with you. So if you need help or just simply want a second opinion, don't hesitate to reach out to us. So the next step is to add our data source, so the Microsoft 365 organization. So you can see that we already have a demo organization here. I could right-click or click on Add Org here and add another one, but let's just open the properties of the existing one so that we can see the configuration. So this is where we select the deployment type and the services we want to protect. Now, the mention regarding Teams chats. The key point to mention here is the following. If we want to back up Teams chats, particularly public channel posts and other conversation data, we must activate the Microsoft Graph Teams export APIs for the tenant. So this is what this tick box here enables. If we do not activate these export APIs, Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 will still back up all other Teams-related objects by default. So, meaning channels, tabs, team membership information, and of course the SharePoint document libraries behind the Teams. What we do not get in that case is the public chat data itself. Now, when we add an organization, we of course choose the authentication method. And of course, we strongly recommend using modern authentication because basic authentication is being deprecated. We also typically pick the Asian region. So standard global region covers most cases, but there are of course dedicated cloud options for Germany, China, etc. And if we go on to the next step, we can either use an existing Azure AD application or let Veeam create a new one. The first time you add an organization, you'll go through these steps, authenticate to Azure AD with sufficient rights, approve the application, and that app is then used for ongoing backup operations. And with that, we have the organization in place, so the source for our data, and we can go ahead and create backup jobs. Now, in the lab, you'll see that we have separate jobs for Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. And even though this is a small data set, this split is still useful because it creates clear failure domains and makes troubleshooting much easier. So we can see which warnings were thrown just for the SharePoint job, let's say, in this situation. And I can see it isolated for my SharePoint objects. Or if we have an error, that is even more helpful. So let's say we have an error in a team's jobs, we can assign an error troubleshooting task to the right administrators instead of burying everything inside one massive job. And just a quick best practice mention here, let's say. It's highly recommended to send SharePoint and Teams data into the same repository. And the reason for this is the way the backend metadata works. So when we pull objects from Microsoft 365, we tag them in our cache database as already downloaded. If a different job, so for example, in our situation, Teams, needs the same object that SharePoint already backed up, Veeam recognizes that the object exists and doesn't download and store it twice. So that saves API calls and also storage costs, especially for content shared between SharePoint and Teams, which is most of the time the case. And if we just take a very, very quick look inside the job, I just wanted to mention here that we are able to select the objects that we wish to back up. So we can either back up the entire organization, which again is not really recommended, or we can go a bit more granular and either select the specific users, or maybe if I click on add, I can add groups, I can add individual, perhaps, or specific sites, teams, or I can choose the entire organization, but then I can go ahead and edit it and just back up the Exchange, so the mail and archive data. And this is actually how we recommend this split. So adding the entire organization, but then splitting the backup jobs between the Microsoft 365 service. All right, so we have running backup jobs. Let's talk about restore. So starting perhaps with Exchange, because that's where everyone immediately sees the value, starts seeing the value, if I do say so myself. So if I just click here on Explore, I can, let's say, explore the latest Exchange state. When we start a restore, depending on where the data is stored, we ideally don't want to scan an entire bucket or container in an object storage, especially if we have a large volume of data. So just a quick mention here, this is actually where the metadata cache comes into play. So Veeam keeps about, let's say, 1% of the data as metadata in the PostgreSQL cache database. So when I start a restore and I only need a single email from a mailbox, let's say, I don't query the whole object storage bucket first. I query the cache, find the exact items and objects I need, and only then do I perform a very targeted retrieval from the object storage. So that's how we minimize API usage and speed up restores. So here we see the Veeam Explorer for Exchange. We have similar explorers for the other workloads, but I'll highlight a few of my favorite features here. So we have a list with all our users, and of course I have access to their calendars, their folders, obviously their inbox, and I can of course see everything that they have, so the emails, information about it, and I can go ahead and check the options that I have for restore. So let's start from the top here, the advanced find. If there's, let's say, a specific request, for example, the legal discovery with strict search criteria, we can search for terms across the entire organization or within specific mailboxes, so we can filter here and let's say filter by specific characteristics that we need. We also have the compare with production. I need to connect myself, but just to mention, we can compare items or item properties with their current state in production. So this is most helpful in situations where, let's say, something was deleted. We'll see that it exists in the backup, but not in the live mailbox. And that helps save a lot of time. And of course, we have a lot of flexible restore options, right? So taking the example of a single email, we can restore it directly to the user's inbox, mailbox. So perfect when someone deleted a critical email, right, and only noticed after it disappeared from the deleted items section. If we want, we can of course restore it to another mailbox or folder, even to an on-premises Microsoft Exchange server. We can export the items. So we can always export them. In case of Microsoft Exchange, we can export them as a PST file. We can export it locally. We can even save it as an MSG file if we want, or perhaps send it back to as a brand new email to the original recipient, let's say, or to someone else. Each workload has its own set of restore options in its own Explorer. So we've checked the Exchange data, but they all follow the same pattern. So we are able to first browse and filter, search and compare, and then choose the appropriate restore or export method. To finish, I'd like to show one last component, and this was also mentioned in the slides by Gabrielle, and this is regarding the Restore portal, the self-service Restore. So the Restore portal is a web-based solution that allows users to perform self-service restores of their backed up data. So as mentioned, we can either let users restore their own data or even define dedicated roles, such as the role of restore operator. So that's particularly attractive for larger organizations where, let's say, help desk or application owners can take over restore tasks without having full backup admin permissions. So to get to this portal in the first place, we have to set it up. So again, we go to the hamburger menu, we go to the general options. So let's do that again because I went a bit ahead of myself. So hamburger menu, general options, and there we go first off to the REST APIs, and we enable them, and then the restore portal tab. So once that's configured, users can sign into the portal and perform restores based on the rights we assigned. And this is a great way to take, again, load off your backup administrators. So recovery becomes part of regular operations instead of, let's say, even a bottleneck. We can even call it that. And I want to show you first how users actually get in, because we have the portal URL here. Here, as mentioned, this is simply a web-based portal. So I will try to access it right now. If we open it here, okay, it's previously open. That's perfect. So just to mention here how we log in, on the welcome page, I enter the same Microsoft 365 user account that I use in the organization, and then I click on login. So at that point, Veeam redirects me to Microsoft Identity Platform for authentication. So I sign in with my Microsoft 365 password, and of course, if MFA is enabled in the tenant, Microsoft will ask me for that as well. So from a user perspective, the login is very straightforward. We open the portal URL, type the Microsoft 365 username, click on login, and complete the sign-in. So now that I am inside the portal, you can see that the experience is intentionally simple, let's say. If I am logged in as an end user, I can I will only be able to see my own backed up data that I am allowed to restore. But if I am logged in as a restore operator, like our situation is, I can have broader delegated access, depending, of course, on the scope, let's say. So the scope that was assigned to me by the Veeam administrator. So this is important to point out, that the restore portal is role aware. The exact data I see depends on whether I am an end user restoring my own data or a restore operator restoring data for other users. And of course, I can browse the available protected workloads directly in this browser, similar to what can be seen in the explorers. Same, I can explore and restore. So again, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams separate. I can work with restore points, as I see here. I can choose something else if I want, or select the newest one, and browse the protected data in a very similar way conceptually to the explorers, just in a much more, let's say, end user friendly interface. So the key message for users here is that the portal is not just a download page, it is a point-in-time recovery interface. So I can browse folders, locate a specific item, and then, of course, choose the restore action that I want, the restore mode, so either to the original location or to a new one, a reason, which, of course, is very handy to have. And I also can create a restore list if I want to download several items. And of course, I can take a look at the restore sessions if I want, just to have a clearer view of what happened. So, of course, if I change over to OneDrive or SharePoint, the same idea applies. So I choose the restore point, I browse the backed up content and recover only what I actually need, instead of asking an administrator to handle the whole request for me. Okay, so with that, thanks a lot for your attention, and I'll hand it back to Gabi for a short wrap up. So, Gabriel, please take the mic.
Of course, of course. Thank you kindly for this demo session, Diana. Right then, I will steal the show once again, and let's see what was left to discuss from that side of things. Good. I suppose we should be live once again from my side. Right. So we finished up with the demo. We can then move on to the next slide. So the last part of our discussion will be about the Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365, just a small one, not too many details. Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365 is just another option for our customers that are looking to protect their Microsoft 365 data. Now, the idea is, instead of providing everything as a software, as we did so far, software that must be managed 100% from your side, right now, we simply just go with the approach of providing access to a platform, the Veeam Data Cloud platform, that simply allows our users to use the Veeam services in order to back up and also restore their Microsoft 365 data. Everything is included, from the deployment itself all the way down to the storage, which is unlimited. And we can also leverage the Microsoft 365 backup storage. And this is a different discussion that we will have towards the end of this session. So, as I mentioned, that is the keyword. Everything is included. The software, the backup infrastructure, the unlimited storage, everything is bundled together in order to provide you with this final service. So from our side, we will just take care of the core components of the operations and automation. So you will not need, for instance, to perform any kind of update of the console, or ensure that you have somebody to manage your infrastructure, or bring your own storage or compute resources such as proxies. Those are just things in the past, since Veeam will take care of everything for you. Now, As the user, you will still be in charge of the backups themselves. So you can create those policies by customizing them. What exactly should be included? What exactly should be excluded? Restoration are also under your responsibility. What should be restored? What should be downloaded locally? Where it should be restored? Because we do have the option, for instance, to send an email from one singular backup to another mailbox from the same tenant. So it pretty much comes down to easing your experience when it comes to protecting the Microsoft 365 data. From the security perspective, this comes as a given from the Veeam side. By default, we are using either Azure or AWS in order to keep the backups. All the storage that we're taking from those guys is 100% immutable, and we will follow the LRS policies, basically local redundancy storage with 3 copies of data being stored in the end. Everything is encrypted from the traffic all the way down to the backup point that gets stored. So when it comes to security, we pretty much ensure that to our customers. We also have a small part of performing let's say, monitoring on top of this solution. So we will have, of course, the possibility of simply sending emails or Teams chat notification when something doesn't really go as planned inside the console. We also have the option to generate reports based on specific areas, such as I would like to get a restore activity report where an administrator might need to see all the restoration that have happened for a month, or a backup policy report just to see how many of my backups have finished successfully. Maybe I'm interested to see the number of objects that I have backed up. We can also go for a user protection report. Let's say we are interested to see exactly what are the objects that I'm backing up for a specific user. Maybe some of my employees, I only require the Exchange services, so the email and the archive mailbox. Maybe other users, I will need to go for their personal OneDrive for Business, for instance. Kind of depends on our needs, but pretty much all of those options are covered inside the Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365 product. Now, we have 3 different editions that can be utilized: the Foundation, the Advanced, and the Premium. Foundation is the classic recipe where we can perform the backup of the Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Teams. Keep in mind, all of those services must be already online, so we cannot really go for protecting physical services or physical servers that run my Exchange services, for instance. So everything must be already as an online given by Microsoft. Foundation is the first one. It allows me to create those backups inside Azure or AWS. At the beginning, you decide where it should be stored. We have multiple regions that you can choose for. The classic retention in the beginning is about 1 year, but you can also change that along the way if you'd like. We will automatically amend the immutability period as well. So whenever we increase, the immutability period will also be increased as well. So that will be the foundation. Next, we will have the advanced. Everything that is included in foundation will still be present, and also we gain the possibility of protecting the Entra ID. Now, for the Entra ID, pretty much a lot of organizations are using them nowadays. We have granular restorations depending on what we are trying to restore. So maybe specific applications or specific groups or specific users, all of those are definitely covered. We can also go for the log backups, so maybe they can be used for any kind of forensic analysis that might be used in the future. We also have that possibility. In the premium, we pretty much have everything in advanced. So the classic backups to either Azure or AWS. We also have the Entra ID since it's included in advanced, and the premium will also give me access to the Microsoft 365 disaster recovery, as we can call it. Basically, that means we are also storing the data inside the Microsoft 365 backup storage. Now, this type of storage sits right next to your Microsoft 365 services, meaning all the backups that are happening, they are lightning fast. As soon as something changes inside the production, we can call it, such as a new file gets generated inside the SharePoint, or a new mail gets, let's say, delivered to one of your employees, automatically we will ensure that the Microsoft 365 backup storage will receive those changes. At all times, this backup happens. Now, for the restore part, everything happens in bulks when we are discussing about the Microsoft 365 backup storage. So the foundation allows me to grow for granular restoration, such as performing the restoration of one singular email. Premium, on the other hand, will allow me to perform a fast bulk restoration of the whole mailbox only. So in a situation where, let's say, my Microsoft 365 services are so affected that I can not recover anything and I need to recover very, very fast, the premium edition is for you in that scenario, because the Microsoft 365 backup storage will allow me to bring everything up and running really fast. Next, we will have some takeaways. Over here, we included some, let's say, vital documentation on different type of topics. We have first and foremost the best practice guide for the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 solution, the Veeam University, which allows you to have a look on specific topics with technical onboarding as a library being present there as well, the KB library, which covers all the knowledge base articles that Veeam posts and updates as well. The sizing calculator, which allows you to see how you should size the Microsoft 365 solution. The EWS throttling, quite important, because the first backup that you will have with either the VBM 365 or the VDCM 365 will take quite a lot of time, because Microsoft can enforce throttling when it comes to performing the backup from the M365 services. In that scenario, we can disable that throttle for a specific amount of time, at least until my full backup is done. So it doesn't take, let's say, multiple weeks or something like that, depending on the amount of data. It will take significantly lower time. And of course, we do have our email address. You can refer to us whenever you'd like to get an answer from our side. If not, you can simply just get in touch with one of your local CSRs, either from the sales or the renewal department, and we can have an open discussion regarding the product itself to see also how we can scale it out inside your environment. Or maybe you deployed and you're interested in a specific functionality. In that scenario, we can have meetings where we explore them together. So whatever the case might be, you can still let us know, and we can take care of that. And of course, sharing the Veeam success story. We do have an advocacy program at the moment where multiple, let's say, customers can simply chip in with their stories regarding how they used Veeam, how it helped in order to overcome a specific situation, and also you can have a chat with the community itself regarding a specific case or a specific scenario that you might need guidance, or let's say you simply want to share your experience. That will be pretty much everything from our side. Thank you very much for joining today in this technical onboarding on the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. As I mentioned, in some time you'll receive both the recording and also the slides. Whatever the questions might be, it's not a problem. Do let us know, and we can have sessions depending on the regions that you're from with the engineer that takes care of that specific area. Thank you. Thank you once again, and have a great rest of the day.